Enter the world of the most resilient young Christians and learn how they are sustaining faith.
Find hope in what God is doing among young Christians today.
For the last 3 years, we've been working on a major new research study trying to understand what helps young Christians be resilient in their faith. We're excited to launch this new project called Faith for Exiles, 5 ways for a new generation to follow Jesus in digital Babylon. Learn why the biblical concept of exile is the right framework for growing deep, resilient faith. I've been working on this project with my friend Mark Mallock, and he's got a long experience of working with this next generation. And so our heart behind this whole project was really to try to deliver some good news, some solutions, some practical ideas behind engaging the heart of this new generation. Discover 5 research-based practices that cultivate faithfulness in our digital post-Christian context.
You know, it's really easy to focus on what the church is doing wrong. There's an endless list of those things. But what is the church doing right, and how does that contribute to faith formation? As a parent, as a leader working with the next generation, that's the question I'm always asking myself. Am I doing the right things?
We hear a lot of people complain about millennials, about Gen Z, but this new project has given me a lot of hope in this next generation of young Christians.
In my work, it's not just about understanding the times, it's also knowing what to do. We want to give you practical help to actually build disciples in this current cultural context.
So it's cool to be able to work with you again on this brand new project, and we hope that this new study gives you insights to turn into action in your ministry and in your context.
Good morning, Singing Oaks, and welcome to our new series, Faith for Exiles. Now, prior to the book, Faith for Exiles, David Kinnaman, he launched a book back in 2011 called You Lost Me: Why Young Christians Are Leaving the Church and Rethinking Faith. It was based on Barna-type research, and they came with some pretty startling, very sobering information and conclusions that they brought to us. In 2011, they concluded that young adults ages 18 to 29 who had grown up in church, grown up in Christian families, grown up in children's programs and youth group, they were leaving the church at a rate of almost 60%. Now those numbers, more recently in 2019, that number was up to 64%. And as we know, since 2019, we had a pandemic where churches were kind of shut down in a sense. And we know that a large number of more than just young adults didn't come back. And so I don't know what that number is now, but we can make the assumption that it's higher than 64%. And so part of the book revealed some of the main reasons. There's a lot of reasons for this kind of number and this kind of exodus, but they highlighted the top 6 reasons, and I'll share those with you real briefly. According to these young adults who walk away, they say church seems way too overprotective, always trying to isolate and protect us from the evil world. For most teens, their experience of church was very shallow. From childhood through teens, we had such attractional models for so long in church. It's about come to our cool events and our cool programs and our cool buildings and bring all your cool friends. But actually what we're giving them, as far as what's biblical and foundational, was really quite shallow for many of them. For many, church seems antagonistic to science. There's this false narrative that secular science and the Bible just do not match up, and they clash. And so they're learning things in school that counter what they're learning from the Word. They view the church's view of sexuality as overly simplified and very judgmental. They reject the exclusive nature of Christianity. Jesus is the only way, the truth, the life. That there's no other name by which we can be saved than Jesus. And in a world that's very pluralistic, that's very universalist, where truth is pretty much seen as relative, and what's true for you is fine, that's great. This aspect of Christianity seems way too exclusive. And often the church feels very unfriendly to those who doubt. These young Christians didn't feel like they had a safe place to ask those really, really tough questions. They felt like they couldn't express the doubt that they were feeling and the things that just weren't lining up for them, and they didn't have a safe place to have those kind of conversations. Now, just add to that just simply the busyness and distractedness of being a young adult and leaving the home and jumping into the workforce or maintaining a full load of college classes and working a part-time job and just the crazy busyness that you find yourself in. Add that to the mix as well. So in 2013, I encountered this book as a full-time youth minister, and I can tell you it was sobering, but it also changed the way I was doing youth ministry. You see, I had operated basically on an assumption that most of my young teens in my youth group had a similar upbringing as I did. My dad, being a preacher, he really loved apologetics. He really loved digging into creationist and science and some of the debates of the secular evolutionist and the creationist. And he loved, he had a friend that was a paleontologist that would take us fossil digging and do all kinds of cool presentations. I mean, I got some cool experiences that really helped solidify my faith in God. And, I saw the holes at a very young age. I saw so many holes in what was being taught in school with Darwinian evolution. And Dad would always point out these flaws in this theory. And I guess I had just operated under the assumption a lot of people had that kind of upbringing. And then I realized, no, I'm kind of weird, okay, but in a good way. So it made me rethink. I remember clearly in that moment as I was reading that book, I was also simultaneously planning a new series for a Wednesday night. And Wednesday night was our big night with youth ministry. And I was planning a series to study the book of Ephesians. I mean, what minister doesn't love to teach out of Ephesians? It's gold. But I had this realization. I thought to myself, what good would it do? I mean, if I could knock it out of the park with this series on Ephesians, I could bring in Rick Ashley or Tony Evans or Francis Chant. Not that I could, but if I could, all right, to teach this lesson for me. Okay, to teach the series for me. What good would it do if I got kids in this group who aren't even really sure there's a God or not? And what good would it do even if there is a God, if they're not convinced that this letter written to a church almost 2,000 years ago, if they're not convinced that that's really inspired by this God, and if it has any weight or any influence in my life today or not? And what do I do about that? And so it sent me on a completely different track with youth ministry, and I decided to really put a whole lot into kind of building a solid foundation for these students. Another thing I realized as I came away with some of this stuff about how we don't give them a safe place to wrestle with doubt. We kind of shelter them from some of the tough stuff in the Bible. I was so bad about that. I remember I'd be preparing a text, and you got this certain verse in this context. You really want to hone in on these verses, but boy, there's some really uncomfortable ones in there too. So let's find our way through that without touching those, because that's going to invite a whole lot of really tough questions, and I don't want to deal with that. And so I said, scratch that. Let's hit it. Let's go at it head on. Let's tackle some of this tough stuff. And I'm not going to come with the approach that I've got all the answers and I'm some sort of an expert, because I'm certainly not. I'm grappling with this stuff too. And when I came with that kind of honesty and transparency, and we worked through this kind of stuff together, I saw a massive change in my youth group. I saw big time fruit from this kind of approach. And so what I want to share with you, I want you to have that backdrop first as we go into the new series, Faith for Exiles. Because what Faith for Exiles is looking at is they're looking at what they consider basically, from their stats and figures, the top 10%. Okay? That of these young adults who grew up in church, who are Christians, that only about 10% would they consider truly disciples, who are really, honestly trying to seek the Lord and model their life after the Savior and be like Jesus and be on mission with Jesus. To be disciples who make disciples, about 10% is what we're looking at. And guys, I am so incredibly blessed, so blessed to get to spend so much time with young adults who are in that 10%. Got a bunch of them sitting over here and a few scattered in other spots. I'm so thankful for these resilient disciples, and we want so desperately to see more and more. What is it about their experience with church that's different than the ones who walk away? And that's what we're exploring in this series. That's why I think it's so incredibly important for us to be all in, fully engaged in this series. So I'm going to go ahead and give you the answers, all right? Pay attention. I'm giving you the answers up front, okay? This is the path for the series. These are the 5 practices for resilient faith, for resilient exiles living in digital Babylon. So the subtitle of this book. And so here are the 5 common denominators, the 5 practices for these resilient disciples. Number 1 is an intimate relationship with Jesus. And that's going to be our first one out of the gate starting next week. As Bo mentioned, Kevin Huddleston will be preaching for us. And what I just learned about Kevin this week, it gets me really excited about him preaching next week, is he, being a youth ministry legend and guru almost, okay, years and years and years of youth ministry, he was actually a contributor to some of the research and some of the content for Faith for Exiles. So you're going to get this from one of the sources next week. So I'm very excited about this. The other practice is that these young adults who are faithful, resilient exiles, they have cultural discernment. They're able to look at the culture and be very aware of what's really going on and discerning good from evil and right from wrong and not having a lemming mentality that just joins the herd and falls off the cliff. That these young adults, in their upbringing in church and in their families, that they had meaningful intergenerational relationships. They weren't just siloed with a bunch of people who had their same age and maturity, that there was mentoring going on. These young adults also understand the concept and embrace the concept of vocational discipleship and mission. That for them, life isn't siloed, like this is my work life, and this is my social life, and this is my church and religious life. That it's the spiritual life is all encompassing, and that I see my work, whatever it is, or my schooling as part of my calling, and I'm using these gifts to glorify God. They get that. And finally, they get countercultural mission. They understand that we're different than the culture. We're swimming upstream, and we own that, and we recognize that. We're called to be different than this world in a lot of ways, a whole lot of ways. And that there's a mission to be fulfilled in the way that we're living. So I want to take you to a passage really quick, James chapter 1. James chapter 1. So just to reiterate again, each of those 5 practices will be each of the next sermons coming up. All right, you don't want to miss this. James 1, 2 through 4. Consider it all joy, my brothers and sisters, when you encounter various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. And let endurance have its perfect result, so that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. So I really want to hone in on this concept of the testing of our faith and this building up of endurance, this struggle. Because I don't think we talk about this as honestly or as frequently as we probably should. Because this concept of struggling with our faith is all through the Bible, Old and New Testament. I mean, think about it. Jacob actually wrestles with God. Israel as a nation wrestles with God. And we're told time and time again, especially in the New Testament writings, to contend and fight for the faith. 2 years ago, we did this series, Faith for Exiles, in the campus ministry, Christian campus community. And it was an awesome series for our Renew Nights. Thursday nights is our big gathering. And during this time, we're talking about the whole grappling with faith, the whole kind of deconstructing of faith that a lot of young adults do, and kind of wrestling with these very tough things when it comes to walking with God. And Michelle Bentley had this great, mic drop kind of analogy for us. It was just so good, and I've shared it time and time again ever since then. But she said, in the Bible, one of the most common analogies for the church and for God is the marriage analogy. That we as the church, we're the bride of Christ, right? And we're waiting for the groom to return. Like, this analogy is extremely biblical, right? And we know marriage, that relationship is so beautiful, it's so special. It's more intimate than any other relationship. I mean, 2 literally have become 1. And yet at the same time, we also know it is tough, right? It is a struggle. It's a fight. It's a fight just to get the marriage to survive, but especially if you want this thing to thrive. It's a struggle, but it's so, so worth it because it's beautiful. It's special. It's anointed. So why? If we know this truth, if we have this reality, we understand this concept, why would we expect our relationship with God to be different? It's like, oh, that's good. I mean, why do we expect it to just be this really smooth path with no challenges or struggles? Shouldn't we expect, if we're going to walk with a Savior who's invisible to the human eye, if we're going to have a relationship, an intimate relationship with God, a God who we can't scientifically prove to our skeptical friends who think we're nuts, if we're going to stay faithful to a God who we don't always get our prayers answered the way we want, if we're going to stay faithful to the God who's described in a book that has some really tough stuff to accept and explain, it's going to be a struggle. It's going to be something that we have to fight and contend for, but it's something that absolutely is so worth it. And we're so blessed with this struggle. I want to share with you one other aspect I think that makes it really tough, and this really applies to both, the marriage thing and our walk with God. And this is going to seem like I'm going off in left field, but just stay with me, okay? It's no secret, okay? It's no secret that Americans are just not that good at math compared to people from different Asian countries, okay? China, Japan, India, parts of the Middle East, they really, really knock it out of the park with math, way better than the average American. Not that we don't have our great mathematicians and engineers as well, but if you go a month from now, if you go to UNT, and you go to any of the College of Education of Engineering or Math, you're going to hear a lot of names you cannot pronounce. Okay? You're not going to hear a lot of American names. You're not going to see a lot of American students walk across the stage. And it's always been puzzling, like, why is that? What is that? Is that a personality thing? Is that the brain? Like, I don't know. What are these things? But I read this study that I thought was very enlightening. And so what they did is they took a bunch of American students, and they took a bunch of students from these countries that are far better at math than we are, and have a higher number or percentage of engineers, and they had them, and they took all of these students who are on equal plane, equal level of math competency, and they gave them all math problems that were way, way, way above them. Like, it's impossible. They are never going to figure this out. They don't have enough understanding and knowledge at this point in education to be successful and come up with the right answers. It's just pretty much impossible. And so none of them got the answers right. None of them got it, but here's the difference. The American students quit in half the time as the students from those other countries. Half the time. And to me, that was really enlightening. Because if you think about it, if you're from China or India and you've got over 1 billion people in your country, there's high competition for the job market, right? You've got to give it everything you can. You can't quit. There's nobody's going to bail you out here. Nobody's going to say, it's okay, we'll do it for you. Here's a trophy. Not everybody gets a trophy. Okay? Now, you may think I'm getting way off into the left field and into the weeds on this thing, but I want you to think about this. If we're prone to quit very early on when things get difficult, even though we're just talking about math right now, how do you think that correlates to marriage? Look at the divorce rate in this country. How do you think that correlates to faith and struggling with God when things get difficult? Remember those stats that just flashed up on the screen. Got a lot of young people been grown up in a culture that just says it's okay to just quit when things get tough. We've got a work cut out for us with helping our young people navigate this tough stuff and stay resilient and stay committed to the Lord. But I want to share this with you as well. I think we do ourselves some favor when we can be honest with people, when we can take off the happy mask and everything's fine, okay? And just be real with each other about the stuff we grapple with. In fact, after the first service, a man, I won't tell you who he was, I won't tell you how old he was, but he was older than me. He came up and he said, you know, everybody talks about these young people and all their struggles with this or that. I got all the same struggles myself. Yeah, that's a great point. I feel you. And we can own these kind of doubts and walk with each other through them. What it does, if we're resilient, it makes our faith even stronger, just like James pointed out in that passage we just read. For many young people, one of the common experiences is to totally deconstruct your faith, to ask the question, always been my favorite question, why? A lot of people know what they believe, they don't know why they believe what they believe. And so when we go through this process of really kind of deconstructing things, a lot of people, it breaks them, but for the resilience, it makes that faith even stronger. Even stronger. I'm so thankful that when I was that age, I had such a solid rock foundation in what I believed in my relationship with God. But all my questions had to do with theology and doctrine and church tradition. And through that journey, it actually made my faith so much stronger. It helped to cleanse me of so much legalism and pharisaical attitudes I'd grown up with. It helped deepen my relationship with God on a whole nother level. I'm so thankful. So thankful. I had the foundation I had, but I grappled with the stuff I grappled with because it did make me stronger. Now, we're talking about this a little bit more individually, but think about this collectively as a church. It's our responsibility as a church, as the body of Christ, to help walk with each other and to help raise our young adults to have this kind of resilient faith. And it is a fight. Listen to what Jude says. In verses 3 and 4, he says, "Dear friends, although I was very eager to write to you about the salvation we share, I felt compelled to write and urge you to contend for the faith." In other words, to fight for the faith. Some other translations make it sound a little bit more like, I was going to write to you about this, but some stuff's come up. Change of plans. We got to deal with some stuff that's going on here. We got to fight. We got to fight for this faith that was once for all entrusted to God's holy people, for certain individuals whose condemnation was written about long ago. In other words, they were prophesied about. They have secretly slipped in among you. They are ungodly people who pervert the grace of our God into a license for immorality and deny Jesus Christ, our only sovereign and Lord. This is a collective fight, a collective call to contend for the faith, because the future of the church, future of our younger generations depend on it. Now, part of this fight and part of this call to resilient faith as exiles is in the backdrop of what the book refers to as digital Babylon. And it's perfect in the series that Bo took us through with Nehemiah and Ezra. It's perfect for where we've been and where we're going to talk about this faith for exiles. And I want to share with you a video that helps better explain what they mean by this term digital Babylon, because it's a theme that we'll have throughout. So check out this video.
Screens. They are profoundly changing the human experience, pushing the tyranny of now, overloading our choices, weaponizing humor, making snarky cool and cynical smart. Where there's an emoji for every mood and a GIF for every moment. The typical 15 to 23-year-old spends nearly 20 times more hours per year using screen-driven media than taking in spiritual content. In ancient Babylon, God's people found themselves in exile, a foreign land, foreign gods, foreign customs. Despite those challenges, a faithful remnant emerged. Today, there are signs of that same type of resilient faith and devotion in modern-day followers of Jesus, living in a digital Babylon. In the screen age, our devices are the new disciple makers. But who are they leading us to follow? These lighted rectangles in our pockets have redefined so much about our lives, including spirituality and the pursuit of God. They have left us in a land marked by phenomenal access, profound alienation, and a crisis of authority. Digital Babylon is the new context for discipleship. We're all exiles now. So where do we go from here? Are we doomed by all that's going wrong, or is there anything going right that can give us hope for a brighter future? In the midst of a screen-led culture remains a faithful few, committed to core practices of resilient discipleship. This faith is strong and sustained. It's a faith we can all learn from. It's a faith for exiles.
Think about Digital Babylon. It's really important to think and realize and recognize that screens disciple us one way or another. They really disciple us. I'll give you a couple of takeaways, a couple of for instances. For instance, some polls and some research of teens from age 12 to young adults of 24, ages 12 to 24 in this country, that the majority of them, viewed not recycling and overuse of electricity and fuel as more immoral than watching pornography. Not that we shouldn't take care of the environment, not that we shouldn't be good stewards of this beautiful planet God has given us, but it's more immoral to not recycle than it is to watch pornography. How did we get there? How did we get there? But when it's so common, when it's so it's constantly accessible, when things become so common, so normalized, so accessible, it seems pretty benign and not very harmful, not much of a problem, not very sinful. One other aspect, and this came from the book, I forget if it was Mark or if it was David, but they talked about their teenage daughter and how he and his wife were checking in on her with some of the things she's looking at online and checking some of her search history on Google, YouTube, and some things on social media. And they were just heartbroken because they realized she had been going to these sites and putting in things like, how do you know if you are struggling with real deal depression? How can you tell? What can you do about your anxiety and depression? What are the best ways to deal with depression? She had mentioned not a single word of this to her parents. And they had a great relationship. It was a very tight-knit, close family. They were just so heartbroken that why would you go to a screen? Why would you let an algorithm and total strangers on the other side of that screen speak about something so heavy, so important, disciple you in this time of struggle and this challenge and this darkness in this valley? Why would you not come to your parents? Why would you not come to your grandparents? Why would you not go to your youth minister or your minister? One of the biggest problems in our society, one of the biggest problems in church is that the family unit is deteriorating. One of the biggest problems is that the community is deteriorating. The actual nuclear family and the spiritual family is under attack from Satan. And this is one of his best tools, one of his best devices. Screens disciple us, but they can be used for both good and bad. So I'm so thankful for the young man who read so well the story of Daniel and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego. Because I think we have to look to guys like that as resilient exiles in a foreign land as we navigate this still very new. It doesn't seem new to our young people. They've grown up with it. But if you're around my age or older, you know it's still pretty new. It's really new. This whole digital age and everything's on a screen and this massive amount of consumption. And it's causing massive problems, and we need to be more aware. We got to get our heads out of the sand. But it's not something we can just simply escape. So look at what Daniel does. Let's read it one more time, just verse 8, Daniel 1. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself in this way. You see, Daniel makes a choice. He's resolved not to be fooled, not to be conditioned, not to be defiled by all this pressure and influence. And there's something really important that doesn't come across in just that one verse, but we know in the context it's really important that Daniel looks to God for his divine intervention in this resolution. God, I need your strength. I can't do this on my own. And Daniel, even though it's just a few of them, he's got a small little community. He's not alone. We need God. We need each other. If we're going to have any chance of being resilient disciples ourselves, and if we're going to have any chance at saving the next generations and helping the church endure. I hope you're engaged and I hope you're ready to jump into this series. I think it's vital. It's so important. Bring some friends with you. Bring some young people. Share these videos on YouTube. We're going to hear from Kevin next week, and I'm excited. I'm really excited about what we're gonna uncover together. But God's calling us to change. He's calling us to be resilient. He's calling us to fight for the faith. My hope is that you'll stand with us, that you'll sing with us, you'll pray with us. If there's something I can pray with you or one of our elders can pray about for you or for your family, please come forward as we stand and sing.